Mafia boss discovers unconscious pregnant widow. On street within minutes, 100 SUVs show up. The sleek black SUV glided through the empty streets of Chicago. Dante Moretti's eyes scanned the shadows between buildings. He didn't trust the quiet. A flash of white caught his attention, and he commanded the convoy to halt. In the dim light of a street lamp, a woman lay crumpled on the curb, white fabric stained with dark patches. Dante approached. The cold air bit his face as he crouched beside her, seeing the swell of her pregnant belly beneath the torn dress. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead. A pulse was weak, but steady. "Get the medical team ready at the estate," he ordered, ignoring his right-hand man's warning that it could be a trap. He couldn't leave her. Two men carefully lifted her limp body and placed her in his SUV, her bloodied dress stark against the black leather. Dante slid in beside her. This was no street woman. Someone with power had wanted her dead. As they approached his estate, the iron gates swung open silently. The medical team was already assembled on the front steps, but Dante's instincts were screaming. Too many shadows seemed to move in the surrounding darkness. Too many eyes watched their approach. This woman, whoever she was, had brought something dangerous to his doorstep. Dante's jaw tightened as he looked down at her unconscious form. He had made his decision the moment he ordered the convoy to stop. Whatever storm was coming, he would face it head-on. "Check the windows on the main wing," Dante commanded, his voice sharp, despite the lingering softness in his gaze toward the woman. "And bring the woman directly to the private suite. No one touches her until the medical team clears her." His right-hand man opened his mouth to protest, but Dante cut him off, his eyes cold and dangerous. "This is my concern now. Understood?" Suddenly, the night erupted. A volley of precise, suppressed gunfire targeted the lead vehicles in the convoy. The low foot sound, blending into a continuous, lethal hiss. The glass of the SUV's tinted windows spiderwebbed as bullets struck the armored paneling. "Get down!" Dante roared, shoving the injured woman's body down and shielding her with his own massive frame. The ambush wasn't a warning. It was a full-scale assault, timed perfectly for the moment they were most vulnerable right outside his sanctuary. Dante knew instantly that the attack wasn't random, and the woman in his arms was the bait that had lured him into the open. Before you continue listening, comment where in the world are you watching from today. The iron gates of Dante's estate groaned shut behind the convoy, the sound echoing through the quiet night. His right-hand man shifted in the front seat, muscles tensing as the first distant rumble reached their ears. "Sir," he said, voice tight with warning. Dante's jaw clenched as he looked through the tinted windows. The sound grew louder, a thundering cascade of engines approaching from all directions. First, a few black SUVs appeared at the perimeter of his property. Then more emerged from the shadows, their headlights cutting through the darkness like predatory eyes. 10 became 20, 20 became 50, until 100 vehicles surrounded his compound, forming an impenetrable wall of metal and machinery. "Get her inside. Now," Dante ordered, his voice deadly calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. His men moved with practiced efficiency, carefully lifting the unconscious woman from the car. Her white dress, now stained crimson, caught the security lights as they rushed her toward the medical wing. Dante watched, his mind racing. Who was she? What made her valuable enough to draw every rival family to his doorstep? Inside the mansion, his security team scrambled into position. The radio crackled with urgent reports. They'd identified vehicles from at least 3 rival families, all heavily armed, all focused on his estate with laser precision. "They're not making any moves," his right-hand man reported, scanning the perimeter cameras. "Just waiting." Dante's fingers brushed against the gun at his hip. 100 cars didn't show up for nothing. This woman, this mysterious, pregnant woman, was worth something to them. something big. In the medical wing, doctors worked quickly to stabilize her. The monitors beeped steadily, tracking her vital signs as they cleaned her wounds and checked on her unborn child. Dante's personal physician looked up as he entered, her face grave. "She's lost blood, but she's strong. Both she and the baby should make it." Dante nodded, his dark eyes fixed on the woman's face. Even unconscious, there was something striking about her features. A strength that hadn't been broken despite whatever violence had led her to this moment. The tension in the compound mounted as reports continued to flood in. His men identified more players in the gathering storm. Outside, representatives from families that hadn't spoken to each other in generations, now united in their pursuit of this one woman. "Sir," his right-hand man appeared at the door. "They're requesting to speak with you." Dante straightened his jacket, preparing to face whatever threat waited outside. But before he could leave, a soft gasp from the bed caught his attention. The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing deep brown irises clouded with pain and confusion. She tried to speak, her lips moving silently as she struggled to form words. Their eyes met for a brief, electric moment, hers filled with fear and something else, something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, or hatred. Before Dante could process what he saw in that gaze, her eyes rolled back, and she slipped into unconsciousness once more. The monitors continued their steady rhythm as if nothing had happened, but Dante felt the weight of that moment settle over him like a shroud. The woman's brief moment of consciousness left him with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. Whoever she was at the center of a storm that threatened to engulf them all. Isabella's eyelids felt heavy as consciousness slowly returned. The sharp scent of antiseptic burned her nostrils, and a dull throb pulsed behind her temples. Harsh, fluorescent lights made her squint as her vision struggled to focus. Through the blur, she could make out pristine white walls and medical equipment, their mechanical beeps cutting through the silence. A dark figure stood motionless near the doorway. As her vision cleared, she saw him tall, imposing, dressed in an immaculate black suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. His presence filled the room like a gathering storm. Panic surged through her body as reality crashed in. This wasn't a hospital. The room might look medical, but something felt wrong, dangerous. Isabella's heart monitor began beeping faster as fear gripped her chest. "Where am I?" Her voice came out raspy and weak. She tried to push herself up, but pain shot through her abdomen. Her hands instinctively went to her stomach, checking her baby. The monitor's beeping increased. The man, Dante, didn't move. His dark eyes studied her with cold calculation, like a predator assessing its prey. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep and controlled. "What happened to you?" Isabella pressed her lips together, fighting back tears. Her fingers clutched the crisp white sheets. She wouldn't tell him anything. She couldn't. The weight of her secrets pressed against her chest, threatening to suffocate her. "I need to leave," she whispered, attempting once more to sit up. Pain lanced through her body, and she gasped. Her muscles trembled with the effort, but she forced herself to keep trying. She had to get out. "Lie down," Dante ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. He took a step closer, and Isabella shrank back against the pillows. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. The medical equipment continued its steady rhythm, marking the heavy silence between them. Outside, she could hear muffled voices and footsteps, more men, she realized, more threats. "You were left for dead," Dante said, his voice dropping lower. "Pregnant, bleeding." Each word felt like an accusation. Someone wanted you to die on those streets. Isabella's hands tightened protectively over her stomach. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress. She blinked back tears, refusing to let him see her cry. Dante moved closer, each step deliberate. His presence seemed to drain the air from the room. When he reached the side of her bed, he placed both hands on the railing, leaning down until his face was level with hers. "You will tell me everything." The words came out as a low growl, a promise of consequences if she refused. Isabella felt the walls closing in. The medical equipment, the locked door, the armed men outside. She was trapped. Her body ached, her head spun, and the most dangerous man she'd ever encountered stood over her, demanding answers she couldn't give. The baby kicked again, reminding her of everything at stake. She met Dante's gaze, seeing no mercy in those dark eyes. In that moment, she knew with crushing certainty that there was no escape from this man or the power he wielded. The mansion's silence pressed against Isabella's ears like a physical weight. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the luxurious bedroom that had become her prison. Her hand rested protectively over her swollen belly as she studied every detail of her gilded cage. Days had passed since she'd woken up here. The same routine: faceless men bringing food, doctors checking her vitals, and always, always, the weight of Dante's cold stares. But tonight was different. The window, usually sealed tight, had been left slightly open. A sliver of hope in an otherwise hopeless situation. Isabella's heart pounded against her ribs as she crept toward the window. The cool night air kissed her face through the gap. She glanced at the door, listening for footsteps. Nothing. The guard rotation had just changed. She'd learned their patterns over the past few days. With trembling fingers, she pushed the window wider. It creaked softly, making her freeze. Seconds ticked by. No one came. Taking a deep breath, she carefully maneuvered her pregnant body through the opening. The exterior ledge was narrow, but manageable. The garden spread out below her, a maze of perfectly manicured hedges and flower beds. Isabella spotted the guards at their usual posts, but there was a gap in their patrol, another detail she'd noticed during her captivity. She lowered herself carefully, using the decorative stonework as handholds. Her feet touched the damp grass, and she pressed herself against the wall, willing her racing heart to slow. The shadows embraced her as she crept between the hedges, keeping low despite her condition. Every step carried her closer to freedom. The estate's boundary wall loomed ahead, dark against the star-filled sky. Isabella allowed herself a small smile. Just a few more yards. A shout shattered the silence. "There! By the south wall!" Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Isabella ran, abandoning stealth for speed, but her pregnant body betrayed her. Heavy footsteps thundered behind her. Rough hands grabbed her arms, yanking her backward. "No!" she screamed, thrashing against their grip. Two of Dante's men held her firmly, their faces grim as they dragged her back toward the mansion. She fought every step, her bare feet leaving trails in the grass. The mansion's lights blazed to life, illuminating the pristine hallways as they forced her inside. Her chest heaved with exertion and fury as they marched her through the corridor. And there he was. Dante Moretti stood in the hallway, his powerful frame blocking her path. His dark eyes burned with barely contained rage as he watched his men drag her forward. The air crackled with tension. "You think you can outrun me?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Isabella lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with equal intensity. Despite the fear coursing through her veins, she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cower. "I'd rather die than stay here with you." The guard's grip tightened on her arms, anticipating Dante's reaction. But she didn't care anymore. She'd rather face his wrath than remain his prisoner. Trapped in this golden cage, while her world crumbled around her. The door slammed open with enough force to make Isabella flinch. Dante stalked in, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the predator beneath. His right-hand man lingered in the doorway, face impassive as he watched his boss approach the handcuffed woman. Isabella's wrists burned against the cold metal restraints. The chair beneath her was hard, unforgiving, just like the man now, circling her with measured steps. His shoes clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing in the silence. "Did you really think you could escape?" Dante's voice was soft, dangerous. He stopped behind her, and Isabella's skin prickled. She couldn't see him, but she felt his presence like a physical weight. "Answer me!" "I had to try," she spat, jerking against the handcuffs. The metal bit into her flesh, but she welcomed the pain. It was better than the fear churning in her gut. Dante moved into view again, his dark eyes boring into hers. The fury in his gaze made her breath catch. "You're not a guest here anymore, Isabella. You're my prisoner now. You can't keep me here forever." But even as she said the words, doubt crept in. The mansion was like a fortress, and his men were everywhere. Her failed escape attempt had only proved how tight his security was. "Can't I?" He leaned down, bracing his hands on the arms of her chair. His face was inches from hers, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. "Look around you. This is my world. My rules. Every door, every window, every person in this house answers to me." Isabella turned her face away, but Dante grabbed her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. His grip wasn't painful, but it was firm, a reminder of the power he held over her. "You think you have a choice?" His thumb brushed her lower lip, the gesture almost gentle despite his harsh words. "This is your life now. My world will consume you, whether you like it or not." "I hate you," she whispered, but her voice trembled. "Hate me all you want." He straightened, adjusting his cuffs with casual elegance. "It won't change anything. You're mine now." The words hit her like physical blows. Each one hammered home the reality of her situation. She was trapped, completely at his mercy. The pregnancy made her vulnerable, limited her options. She couldn't risk her baby's safety with another escape attempt. Dante moved toward the door, pausing, to speak with his right-hand man. Their voices were low, but Isabella caught fragments about increased security and constant surveillance. The door closed behind them with a final click. Alone in the room, Isabella slumped in her chair. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. The handcuffs bit into her wrists, a constant reminder of her captivity. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She wasn't just locked in a room. She was locked in a nightmare. A nightmare controlled by a man who seemed to hold all the cards, who could make or break her with a single word. Through the window, she could see the sun setting, painting the sky in shades of blood red. Another day ending, another night beginning. But for Isabella, time had lost all meaning. In Dante's world, there was only his will, his rules, his control. She was trapped, and the worst part was knowing that no one was coming to save her. In this golden cage, she was completely alone. Dante stood in the doorway of Isabella's room, his broad shoulders blocking any chance of escape. Sunlight filtered through the window behind him, casting his face in shadow. His presence filled the space like smoke, suffocating and inescapable. "Who are you?" His voice was quiet but held an edge that made Isabella's skin prickle. She sat on the bed, her hands folded protectively over her growing belly. The silk nightgown they'd given her felt too soft against her skin, too expensive. Everything in this gilded prison reminded her of how far she was from home. "I already told you. I'm nobody." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Dante moved closer, each step deliberate. His expensive Italian suit couldn't hide the predator beneath. "Nobody doesn't get 100 SUVs showing up at my door. Nobody doesn't make every family in the city scramble for position." He stopped just short of the bed. "Try again." Isabella's heart hammered in her chest. She kept her eyes fixed on a spot on the wall, refusing to meet his gaze. "I don't know what you're talking about." His hand shot out, gripping her chin. The touch wasn't painful, but it brooked no argument. He forced her to look at him. "Your silence won't protect you. It won't protect that baby either." Her breath caught. The mention of her child made her want to scratch his eyes out, but she remained still. His cologne wrapped around her. Expensive, masculine, intoxicating despite her fear. Threatening a pregnant woman? She tried to inject venom into her words. "You're everything they say you are." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "What they say about me?" His thumb brushed her bottom lip, the gesture almost gentle. "You don't know the half of it." Isabella jerked away from his touch. "I know enough." "No." Dante's voice dropped lower. "You don't, because if you did, you'd understand that your silence is only making things worse." He began to pace the room, his movements fluid like a caged tiger. "Someone wants you, dead. Someone powerful enough to mobilize half the families in this city. And yet," he turned back to her, his dark eyes intense. "Here you are, still breathing." Isabella's hands trembled. She clasped them tighter around her middle. "I know you're connected to someone from my past," he continued, watching her face for any reaction. "The question is who? A rival? An old friend turned enemy?" His lips curved into a dangerous smile. "A lover? Perhaps?" "You don't know anything," she whispered. Dante leaned down, his face inches from hers. "Then enlighten me." For a moment, their eyes locked. This close, Isabella could see flecks of gold in his dark irises. Something flickered there. Not just the cold calculation she'd come to expect, but something deeper. A hint of what? Pain? Uncertainty? The realization hit her like a physical blow. Despite his power, his control, there was vulnerability in him. It was well hidden, buried beneath layers of violence and authority. But it was there. She saw it in the way his eyes searched hers, in the gentle way he'd touched her face despite his harsh words. Her mind raced with this new understanding. She'd thought him a monster, pure and simple. But monsters didn't show concern for pregnant women found bleeding in the street. They didn't provide medical care and silk nightgowns. They didn't look at you with eyes that held questions instead of just threats. "Nothing to say?" he asked, his breath warm against her cheek. Isabella swallowed hard. The game she was playing was dangerous, she knew that. But every moment she spent with him made the lines blur further. He was her captor, yes, but also her savior. A threat, but also a shield. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. Not yet. The first gunshot shattered the evening calm. Dante's right-hand man burst through the door of Isabella's room, his face tight with tension. "Sir, they've breached the perimeter." Dante's eyes narrowed as he moved to the window. Below, black-clad figures slipped through the shadows of his estate like deadly ghosts. His men were already in position, waiting for his command. "Stay here," he ordered Isabella, his voice cold and firm. But before he could leave, more gunfire erupted, closer this time. The window exploded inward, sending glass flying everywhere. Dante moved with lightning speed, shielding Isabella with his body. "Move!" he growled, dragging her toward the door. The hallway was chaos. Guards running, shouting orders, the sound of combat echoing through the mansion. Isabella's heart hammered in her chest as Dante pushed her behind a marble column. She watched, frozen, as he drew his weapon with fluid grace. His men formed a protective circle around them, their movements precise and practiced. The first wave of attackers burst through the grand entrance. Dante didn't hesitate. His gun barked twice, and 2 men fell. He moved like a predator, each step calculated, each shot deadly. His right-hand man covered his flank, equally lethal. Blood splattered across the imported marble floors. Bodies dropped one after another. Isabella couldn't look away from Dante. His movements were almost beautiful in their brutality. He fought with the confidence of a man who had done this countless times before. Attacker got too close, and Dante's response was immediate. He grabbed the man's arm, twisted it until bones snapped, then ended him with a single shot. His face showed no emotion, just cold efficiency. More men poured in. Dante's crew met them with devastating force. The air filled with gunpowder and the metallic scent of blood. Isabella pressed herself against the column, her hands trembling. This was the true face of the man who held her captive, not just a businessman, but a killer. Yet even in his violence, there was something else. Every few seconds, his eyes would find her, checking her position, ensuring she was safe. When a stray bullet came too close, he shifted his stance to better shield her. The fighting moved through the mansion like a deadly dance. Dante orchestrated it all, calling out commands in a voice that cut through the chaos. His men responded instantly, moving as one devastating unit. Finally, the last attacker fell. Silence descended, broken only by the heavy breathing of survivors. Bodies littered the once pristine floors, blood seeping into expensive carpets. Dante stood in the center of it all, his suit splattered with red. He wiped his hands methodically on a handkerchief, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he turned to look at Isabella, his eyes were still cold, but something else flickered there. Concern, perhaps, or possession. Isabella couldn't stop shaking. The violence she'd witnessed was beyond anything she'd imagined. This man, who had seemed dangerous before, was now terrifying in a whole new way. She'd watched him end lives without hesitation, with the ease of someone signing papers. But she couldn't forget how he'd shielded her, how his eyes had sought her out again and again during the fight. He was a killer, yes, but maybe, just maybe, he could also be a protector. Dante's gaze held hers, and in that moment, the air between them crackled with unspoken tension. She was afraid of him, of what he could do, but something else stirred beneath that fear, something she wasn't ready to name. The dining room stretched before them like a battlefield. The mahogany table, an expanse of polished wood that separated Dante from Isabella. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, casting prism-like shadows across the white tablecloth. The only sounds were the soft clink of silverware and the distant footsteps of guards patrolling the mansion. Isabella pushed her food around her plate, feeling Dante's eyes on her. Days had passed since her failed escape attempt, and the silence between them had grown heavier with each passing hour. Her pregnancy made eating difficult. The morning sickness hadn't subsided, and the stress of captivity didn't help. Dante set down his fork, the sound echoing in the quiet room. "You barely touch your food. I'm not hungry," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. The suit he wore fit him perfectly, a stark contrast to the violence she'd witnessed days ago. The baby needs nourishment. The mention of her child made her grip her fork tighter. She looked up, meeting his dark eyes across the table. Something in her gaze must have triggered something in him. Dante's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. "I was younger than you when I first killed someone." The confession hung in the air between them. Isabella's hand stilled over her plate. 14, he continued, his voice low and controlled. "My father handed me a gun and told me to prove myself." He reached for his wine glass, but didn't drink. The man deserved it. He'd betrayed our family. But that moment changed everything. Isabella found herself listening, despite her determination to hate him. There was something raw in his voice, something honest that cut through her defenses. "This life," he gestured to the opulent room around them, "it comes with a price. Everything has a price." His eyes fixed on her again. "I learned that early." My father made sure of it. Did you have a choice? The words left her mouth before she could stop them. A bitter smile crossed his face. Choice is a luxury few of us have in this world. He stood, walking to the window that overlooked the garden. I became what I needed to be to survive, then to thrive. He turned back to face her. The violence you saw? That's who I am. That's what keeps everyone in line, keeps my people safe. Isabella pushed her chair back slightly, creating distance. And what am I? Another thing you need to keep in line? You're... He paused, something flickering in his eyes. You're a mystery I need to solve, a liability I can't afford to let go. She stood then, her hands trembling slightly. I've seen men like you before, men who justify their actions with pretty words about necessity and survival. Dante moved closer, his presence filling her space. The air grew thick with tension. Have you? Have you really seen men like me? His voice dropped lower. Or have you only seen the shadows they cast? Isabella held her ground, though her heart hammered in her chest. She could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. You don't get to judge me. His words came out as a growl, but there was something else there, a vulnerability she hadn't expected. Isabella lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. I'm not judging, she whispered, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. I'm surviving. The message arrived just as dawn broke over the estate. Dante's right-hand man entered his study without knocking, his face grim. The manila envelope he carried seemed innocent enough. But Dante knew better. Nothing innocent ever came in manila envelopes. Sir, we found something about her husband. His trusted associate placed the envelope on the mahogany desk. You'll want to see this yourself. Dante's jaw tightened as he pulled out the contents. Photos scattered across his desk. Surveillance shots, documents, bank statements. Each piece told a story, one that made his blood run cold. Isabella's husband hadn't just been a rival, he'd been a traitor. The evidence was damning. Secret meetings with Dante's enemies, offshore accounts filled with blood money, plans to overthrow the Moretti family's control. Her husband had played both sides, manipulating everyone around him, including Isabella. Get her, Dante ordered, his voice low and controlled. When Isabella entered his study, she carried herself with the same defiance she'd shown since day one. But something in Dante's expression made her pause. Sit down, he commanded, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. She remained standing. I prefer to sit down. This time, she complied, her eyes never leaving his face. Dante spread the photos across his desk, watching as recognition flickered across her features. Your husband, he began, his voice dangerously soft, was planning to destroy everything I built. Isabella's hands trembled as she picked up one of the photos. It showed her husband shaking hands with one of Dante's worst enemies. This can't be right. He played us all, Dante continued, pacing behind his desk. He was working with my enemies, planning to take over my territory. The money, the connections, everything, it was all built on betrayal. Color drained from Isabella's face as she sifted through more evidence. Bank statements showed millions transferred to accounts she'd never known about. Documents detailed plans that would have torn apart the delicate balance of power in the city. No, she whispered, but the truth was there in black and white. He wouldn't. He did. Dante's voice was flat. And now you're carrying his child, trapped in the middle of a war he started. Isabella's head snapped up, anger flashing in her eyes. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Her voice cracked with emotion. All this time, you kept me here, treated me like a prisoner, and you knew? You knew what kind of man he was? Dante stopped pacing, turning to face her fully. His expression hardened, but something flickered in his dark eyes. Was it sympathy? It wasn't my place to tell you. Isabella stood abruptly, sending the chair scraping across the floor. Not your place? She laughed bitterly. You've kept me locked up, controlled my every move. And suddenly, you care about what's your place. The truth about your husband needed to come from the evidence, not from me. Dante's voice remained steady. Would you have believed me if I'd told you? She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. He was right. She wouldn't have believed him, not without proof. The weight of reality crashed down on her shoulders. Everything she'd thought she knew about her life, her marriage, was a lie. Her husband hadn't been the successful businessman she'd thought. He'd been a manipulator, a traitor playing a dangerous game. Isabella sank back into the chair, her hands protectively covering her stomach. Her world had just shattered, and she was left picking up the pieces while carrying the child of a man she no longer knew. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante's expression hardened. It wasn't my place to tell you. Isabella's fingers trembled as she unfolded the worn paper she'd found tucked behind a loose panel in her room. The safe house was quiet, save for the distant footsteps of Dante's men patrolling the corridors. Her heart pounded as she began to read, recognizing her late husband's hurried handwriting. The first lines made her blood run cold. Details of secret meetings, underground deals, and a calculated plan to destroy Dante Moretti from within. Each word felt like a knife twisting in her chest. The man she'd married, the father of her unborn child, had been orchestrating an elaborate betrayal. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs too weak to hold her. The letter spoke of offshore accounts, rival family alliances, and carefully planted spies within Dante's organization. Her husband hadn't just been involved in the Mafia world, he'd been playing both sides, manipulating everyone around him. The door burst open. Dante stood there, his face a mask of controlled fury. One of his men must have spotted her finding the letter through the security cameras. His eyes fixed on the paper in her hands, and something dark flickered across his features. "Give it to me," he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Isabella clutched the letter tighter, her knuckles white. "I need to finish reading it. Now." He crossed the room in 3 swift strides, towering over her. She held out the letter with shaking hands. Dante snatched it, his eyes scanning the contents. With each line, his jaw clenched tighter. The muscle in his cheek twitched. She'd never seen him like this. The raw pain beneath his anger was impossible to miss. Your husband, he spat the word like poison, was planning to destroy everything I built. He turned my own men against me, used my trust against me. His voice cracked slightly on the last words. Isabella pressed her hands against her stomach, feeling sick. I didn't know any of this. He never told me. Lies. Dante slammed his fist against the wall, making her jump. He was in my home, at my table. I treated him like a brother. The paper crumpled in his grip. And all that time, he was plotting to tear me down. Please, Isabella whispered. I swear I knew nothing about this. He kept me in the dark about everything. Dante turned to her, his eyes burning with a mixture of rage and something deeper betrayal that cut to the stare. Bone, you expect me to believe that? His own wife? Yes. She stood up, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Do you think I would have ended up bloody and unconscious on that street if I'd known? Do you think I would choose this? She gestured to her surroundings, to her captivity. He lied to me too, Dante. He lied to everyone. The silence that followed was deafening. Dante stared at her, searching her face for any sign of deception. His breathing was heavy, his shoulders rigid with tension. You knew? He finally demanded, his voice rough with emotion. Tell me the truth, Isabella. Did you know anything about this? Isabella felt tears spilling down her cheeks, hot and desperate. I didn't know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't know anything. The man I married, I didn't know him at all. The explosion rocked the compound, shattering the midnight silence. Isabella jolted awake, her heart hammering against her ribs as glass rained down from the windows, the air filled with smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Dante burst through her door, his suit jacket already discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscled forearms. His gun glinted in the darkness. "Stay close to me," he ordered, his voice rough with tension. Another explosion lit up the night sky. The sound of automatic weapons filled the air, accompanied by shouts and the heavy thud of boots on marble floors. This wasn't like the other attacks. These people moved with purpose, with intimate knowledge of the compound's layout. "They're inside," Dante's right-hand man called from the hallway. "South wing is compromised." Isabella's legs trembled as Dante grabbed her arm, pulling her against his chest. His heartbeat was steady despite the chaos, a sharp contrast to her own racing pulse. The warmth of his body against hers sent an inappropriate shiver down her spine, even in the midst of danger. "Move," he commanded, guiding her through the dark corridor. His men formed a protective circle around them, their weapons raised and ready. A figure emerged from the shadows ahead. Isabella recognized the stance, the way he held his weapon. One of her late husband's men. The realization hit her like a physical blow. These weren't just random attackers. These were people who knew her, who had served her husband. Gunfire erupted. Dante shoved her behind a marble column, shielding her with his body. The heat of him pressed against her back, his breath hot on her neck as bullets whizzed past. His men returned fire, their shots precise and deadly. "This way," Dante growled, pulling her toward a hidden passage. But before they could reach it, 3 more attackers appeared. One of them locked eyes with Isabella, recognition flashing across his face. "Mrs. Romano," he called out, using her married name. "Your brother sends his regards." The words froze her blood. Her brother? The same brother who had disappeared months ago, who she thought had abandoned their family? Dante's grip on her tightened painfully. "You're not taking her," he snarled, his voice dropping to a dangerous register that made the air itself seem to vibrate. The battle that followed was brutal. Dante moved like a force of nature, each shot finding its mark with deadly precision. His men fought with similar efficiency, but these attackers knew what they were doing. They had come prepared. One of them managed to grab Isabella's arm, trying to drag her away. She fought back, kicking and scratching, but he was too strong. For a moment, real fear gripped her. Not of death, but of being taken away from Fra Dante. The thought barely had time to register before Dante was there. His fist connected with her attacker's jaw with a sickening crack. The man dropped, and Dante stood over him, eyes blazing with murderous intent. He emptied his clip into the man's chest, each shot punctuating the air like thunder. When the last echo of gunfire died away, the compound fell into an eerie silence. Bodies littered the floor, blood staining the expensive marble. Isabella's legs finally gave out, and she slid down the wall, her whole body shaking. Dante knelt before her, his hands cupping her face. His fingers were stained with blood, but his touch was gentle. His chest heaved with exertion, his usually perfect hair falling across his forehead. Those dark eyes burned into hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "I'll never let them take you," he said, his voice raw and fierce. "Not while I'm still breathing." The morning sun filtered through bulletproof windows, casting long shadows across Dante's office. Isabella sat across from him, her hands wrapped around an untouched cup of coffee. The silence between them was heavy, charged with unspoken words and mounting tension. Dante's right-hand man stood by the door, his presence a stark reminder of the danger that lurked beyond these walls. His usual stoic expression carried a hint of concern as he watched his boss, something he'd never shown before. "The perimeter is secure," he reported, his voice low and controlled. "But they're out there, waiting." Dante's jaw clenched. He'd barely slept, spending the night reviewing security footage and coordinating with his men. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but his gaze remained sharp as he studied Isabella. She'd changed in the past few days. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by something harder, more determined. "We need to move you." Dante finally broke the silence. "I have a safe house in Switzerland. Remote. Protected." His fingers drummed against his desk, a rare display of nervous energy. "My men can have you there by nightfall." Isabella set down her coffee cup with deliberate slowness. "No." Dante's right-hand man shifted uncomfortably, sensing the brewing confrontation. He'd seen that look in Isabella's eyes before, the same stubborn defiance that had driven her previous escape attempts. "This isn't a request," Dante growled, leaning forward. "You've seen what they're capable of. Last night was just the beginning. I'm not running." Isabella's voice was steady, despite the slight tremor in her hands. "I've spent my entire life running. From the truth about my husband, from my brother's schemes, from reality." She stood up, placing both palms flat on his desk. "I'm done running." The muscle in Dante's jaw twitched. His right-hand man had never seen him this affected by anyone before. Usually, Dante's word was law. No one dared to challenge him. But Isabella, she was different. "You'll die if you stay." Dante's voice was low. "Dangerous. Is that what you want?" "What I want," Isabella met his gaze unflinchingly, "is to face this head-on. My husband's betrayal, my brother's involvement, all of it. I won't spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." Silence fell again. Dante's right-hand man watched the silent battle of wills, knowing his boss was fighting an internal war. The logical choice was to force her to leave in steel. They couldn't afford any weaknesses right now. But something else was at play here. Something that made Dante hesitate. "You don't understand what you're asking." Dante rose from his chair, his imposing figure casting a shadow over Isabella. "Staying means you're choosing this life. My life. There's no going back." "I understand perfectly." Isabella didn't back down. "I'm choosing to stop being a victim. I'm choosing to fight." The tension in the room was palpable. Dante's right-hand man watched as something shifted in his boss's expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxation of his clenched jaw. For a moment, the hardened Mafia boss disappeared, replaced by something more human. Then, just as quickly, the mask slid back into place. Dante's expression hardened, but there was something different in his eyes as he looked at Isabella. "Then we'll face it together." Through the mansion's tinted windows, dawn painted the sky in hues of blood orange. Isabella stood at the Tenerice glass, her fingers pressed against the cool surface, watching Dante's men load weapons into unmarked vehicles. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a reminder of how quickly everything had changed. Behind her, Dante paced the room like a caged lion. His shoes clicked against the marble floor in a steady rhythm that matched her pulse. The sound should have irritated her, but instead, it grounded her, reminded her she wasn't alone in this mess. "We should leave now," he growled, stopping mid-stride to check his phone. His jaw clenched, the muscle there twitching. "My right-hand man says they're closing in from the east." Isabella turned from the window, one hand unconsciously moving to her swollen belly. "I told you, I'm not running." Dante's dark eyes locked onto hers, intensity radiating from him in waves. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, towering over her. "This isn't about running. This is about surviving." The heat from his body wrapped around her like a blanket, making it hard to think straight. She could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her head spin. His presence was overwhelming, suffocating, yet she couldn't step away. "Your brother's men are everywhere," Dante continued, his voice dropping lower. "They've cut off 3 escape routes already. We're being cornered like rats." The mention of her brother sent ice through her veins. The betrayal still felt fresh, raw. How could her own blood do this to her? Use her pregnancy as leverage against Dante? The thought made her sick. "Then we fight," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "I'm tired of being a pawn in everyone's games." A ghost of a smile touched Dante's lips, pride flickering in his eyes. "You're no pawn, Isabella. You never were." The sound of running footsteps in the hallway made them both tense. The door burst open, and Dante's right-hand man appeared, his usually stoic face lined with worry. "Boss, they're here. At least 50 men, heavily armed. They've breached the outer perimeter." Dante's expression hardened into something deadly. He reached for his gun, checking the magazine with practiced ease. "How long?" "Minutes. Maybe less." Isabella's heart raced faster. The choice loomed before them like a dark cloud. Fight or surrender. Stay or run. Her brother wouldn't stop until he had what he wanted, control over Dante's empire, using her and her unborn child as leverage. "I won't let them take you," Dante said, his voice thick with promise. He turned to her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Gone was the cold calculation, replaced by something raw and possessive. "But you have to trust me completely. No more secrets, no more doubts. Trust." Such a simple word, yet it carried the weight of worlds. Could she trust this man who'd kept her prisoner? This dangerous creature who'd killed without remorse? This person who'd somehow wormed his way past her defenses? The mansion's security alarm blared to life, its harsh wail echoing through the halls. Outside, gunfire erupted, shattering the morning calm. The sound of breaking glass and shouting filled the air. "Time's up," Dante's right-hand man announced, drawing his weapon. Dante moved closer to Isabella, his body automatically shielding hers. His free hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheek in a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "Last chance?" he murmured. "Tell me now if you want out. I'll find a way." Isabella looked up at him, really looked at him, past the dangerous exterior, past the violence and power, to the man who'd protected her, who'd shown her glimpses of something deeper, something real. "I'm staying," she whispered, her voice stronger than she felt. His eyes darkened with an emotion she couldn't name. He leaned down, his lips barely brushing her ear as he spoke words that sent electricity down her spine. "You're mine, Isabella, forever." The morning sun cast long shadows across Dante's estate as his men moved into position. The air crackled with tension. Everyone knew this was the day everything would change. Isabella stood at the window of Dante's office, watching the preparations below. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she observed dozens of armed men taking their positions. Behind her, Dante's right-hand man briefed him on the latest intelligence. "They're coming in force, boss. At least 3 rival families have joined together." "Let them come." Dante's voice was ice-cold, deadly. He moved to stand behind Isabella, his presence both threatening and comforting. "They think they can take what's mine." Isabella turned to face him, her eyes meeting his dark gaze. The past weeks had changed everything between them. The fear was still there, but now it mixed with something deeper, more dangerous, something that made her pulse race whenever he was near. The first explosion rocked the compound's outer walls. Glass shattered somewhere in the distance, and gunfire erupted like thunder. Dante's right-hand man sprung into action, barking orders into his radio as he rushed from the room. "Stay close to me," Dante commanded, pulling out his gun. His free hand gripped Isabella's arm, firm but not painful. "Whatever happens, don't leave my side." They moved through the mansion's corridors as chaos erupted around them. The sound of breaking glass and shouting filled the air. Dante's men engaged the intruders, and the mansion became a war zone. Isabella's heart pounded as they navigated the violence, Dante's body shielding her from danger. A group of attackers burst through a side door. Without hesitation, Dante pushed Isabella behind him and opened fire. His movements were precise, lethal. 3 men fell before they could even raise their weapons. The 4th got off a shot that whistled past Isabella's ear before Dante's bullet found its mark. "Move!" Dante grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the safe room. But as they rounded the corner, Isabella spotted a movement in her peripheral vision. Acting on pure instinct, she grabbed a fallen gun and fired. The hidden attacker crumpled, his weapon clattering to the floor. Dante's eyes widened slightly, the first genuine surprise she'd ever seen on his face. "You've been holding out on me. My husband taught me to shoot," she replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I guess he never thought I'd use those skills against his own people." More gunfire erupted nearby. Dante pulled her into an alcove, his body pressing against hers as bullets whizzed past. His warmth enveloped her, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. His dark eyes bore into hers, filled with possession and something that looked dangerously like love. "I should have known you were more than just a victim," he murmured, his breath hot against her ear. "You're a survivor." The moment shattered as an explosion rocked the building. Dante's men were shouting, engaging the enemy on multiple fronts. Isabella could hear the fighting getting closer. She knew she had to make a choice: run from this dangerous world or embrace it. Embrace him. Dante seemed to read her thoughts. "There's still time. I can get you out." Isabella gripped her stolen gun tighter, feeling its weight in her hand. She thought about her late husband's betrayal, about the lies she'd lived with, about the strange new truth she'd found in Dante's violent world. Here, at least, the danger was honest. "No," she said firmly, meeting his gaze. "I'm staying." A fierce pride flickered in Dante's eyes. He pulled her close, kissing her hard and fast, before readying his weapon. Together, they moved back into the fray, fighting side by side. Isabella matched his pace, covering his blind spots as he took down enemy after enemy. They moved like dancers in a deadly ballet, their movements synchronized, lethal. Blood spattered the expensive wallpaper as Dante's bullets found their marks. Isabella's shots weren't as precise as his, but they were effective. When her gun clicked empty, Dante wordlessly passed her a fresh weapon, never breaking stride. The compound lay in ruins, a testament to the violence that had unfolded. Broken glass crunched under Dante's expensive leather shoes as he walked through what remained of his empire. Blood stained the marble floors, and bullet holes riddled the once pristine walls. The air still held the acrid smell of gunpowder. Isabella kept pace beside him, her heart pounding with each step. Bodies of fallen enemies littered their path, a grim reminder of Dante's ruthlessness. His right-hand man followed at a distance, directing the cleanup crew with quiet efficiency. 6 years, Dante said, his voice echoing in the destroyed hallway. 6 years I spent building this place. His jaw clenched as he kicked aside a shell casing. The metal skittered across the floor, the sound sharp in the eerie silence. Isabella watched him, noting how his shoulders tensed with barely contained rage. His perfectly tailored suit was torn and bloodied, yet he moved with the same deadly grace she'd grown to recognize. His hand never strayed far from his weapon. They reached his office, or what was left of it. The massive mahogany desk was splintered, papers scattered everywhere. Family photos lay shattered on the ground, generations of Morettis staring up from broken frames. "Your brother thought he could take this from me." Dante's voice was ice cold. He turned to face Isabella, his dark eyes boring into hers. "He thought he could use you as leverage." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. The mention of her brother's betrayal still stung fresh. "I didn't know." "No." Dante cut her off, closing the distance between them. "You didn't. But now you're going to see exactly what happens to people who cross me." He grabbed a fallen chair, righting it with one smooth motion. "Sit." Isabella hesitated for a moment before complying. Her hands trembled slightly as she lowered herself into the chair. "Your brother, your late husband, they never understood what it means to hold this kind of power." Dante began pacing, his movements measured and controlled. The weight of it, the responsibility. He stopped suddenly, turning to face her. "Every decision I make affects hundreds of lives. Every show of weakness invites challengers. Every moment of mercy is seen as an opportunity to strike." Isabella watched as he ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare display of frustration. The morning light filtering through the broken windows cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the cuts and bruises from the fight. "You don't understand what it's like to be in my shoes," he said, his voice dropping lower. "To know that every person who smiles at you might be plotting your death. To never truly sleep because the next threat could come at any moment." Isabella rose from her chair, meeting his intense gaze. Despite everything she'd seen, despite the fear that still lingered, she refused to back down. "Then make me understand." Dante moved with lightning speed, his hand gripping her arm. The touch wasn't painful, but it was firm, a reminder of his strength, his control. He leaned in close, his breath warm against her cheek. The scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne filled her senses. "You'll learn," he said, his voice a dangerous whisper. "One way or another." The mansion's grand halls echo with an uneasy silence. Isabella stands by the window in Dante's study, watching his men patrol the grounds below. The morning sun catches on broken glass and bullet casings that still litter the courtyard. Behind her, Dante paces, his shoulders tense, phone pressed to his ear as he barks orders in Italian. The events of the past few days have left their mark, both physical, in the scarred walls and shattered windows, and emotional, in the way neither of them can quite meet the other's eyes anymore. Dante's right-hand man appears at the door, his expression grim. "Boss, we need to talk." He casts a pointed look at Isabella. "She stays," Dante says, his tone leaving no room for argument. The man nods, though his discomfort is obvious. "Our sources confirmed it. The attack wasn't random. It was orchestrated by Romano." Dante cuts in, his jaw clenching. "That bastard's been waiting for this." Isabella pretends to focus on the window, but her ears strain to catch every word. Her heart pounds as the conversation continues. "He knew about her family, boss, had eyes on her husband for months before." The man hesitates. "The betrayal went deeper than we thought. Her husband wasn't just planning to cross you. He was going to use her, trade her to Romano's faction for protection and power." The crystal tumbler in Dante's hand shatters. Isabella flinches at the sound, turning to face him. Blood drips from his clenched fist, but he doesn't seem to notice. "Get out," he orders his man, who quickly complies. Isabella's hands shake as fury builds inside her. "How long have you known?" Her voice cracks. "About my husband's plan to use me?" Dante's dark eyes meet hers. "Isabella, don't." She steps closer, anger making her bold. "Did you ever care about me at all? Or was I just another pawn? Another piece in your twisted game?" He moves with predatory grace, closing the distance between them until she's backed against the window. His bloodied hand leaves a crimson streak on the glass as he cages her in. "You were never a pawn," he growls, voice rough with emotion. "You were a weakness I never wanted to admit." The confession hangs heavy between them. Isabella's breath catches as she searches his face, looking for any sign of deception. But all she sees is raw honesty in those dark eyes. "And what am I to you now?" she whispers, heart thundering in her chest. Dante's hand comes up to grasp her chin, tilting her face toward his. His touch is surprisingly gentle despite the intensity in his gaze. You're everything." The morning sun cast long shadows across Dante's estate, but the light did nothing to ease the heaviness in Isabella's chest. She stood by the window, watching Dante's men reinforce the perimeter. Their movements were precise, mechanical, like a well-oiled machine preparing for war. Dante stood at his desk, his shoulders tense as he reviewed security reports. Isabella studied his profile, noting the darkness that seemed to radiate from him. His jaw clenched and unclenched, a telltale sign of the storm brewing beneath his controlled exterior. "The East Wing needs more coverage," he barked into his phone. His voice carried the weight of countless betrayals, countless battles. Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the walls of the mansion closing in. The luxurious furnishings and marble floors felt more like a prison than ever. She could see it now, the way past treacheries had shaped Dante into the man before her. How each betrayal had added another, a layer of ice around his heart. The door burst open. Isabella turned, expecting another of Dante's men with a security update. Instead, her heart stopped. "Marco?" The name left her lips in a whisper. Her brother stood in the doorway, older than she remembered, harder. The boyish features she'd known were gone, replaced by sharp angles and cold eyes. He was supposed to be dead. She'd mourned him years ago. "Hello, sister." Marco's voice carried none of the warmth from their childhood. Dante moved with predatory grace, positioning himself between them. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as the two men sized each other up. "You're not welcome here," Dante growled, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. Marco's lips curved into a cruel smile. "That's no way to greet family, Moretti." "Family?" Dante spat the word like poison. "You betrayed this family years ago. The weapons deal in Milan, that was you." Isabella's head spun. The infamous Milan betrayal she'd heard, whispers about it. About how someone had sold out the Moretti family to their rivals. Dozens had died. "Isabella," Marco turned to her, ignoring Dante's murderous glare. "Pack your things. You're leaving with me." "She's not going anywhere." Dante's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Marco stepped forward. "You think you can keep her? After what your family did to her husband?" "Stop," Isabella pleaded, but it was too late. Dante moved like lightning. His fist connected with Marco's jaw, sending him stumbling backward. Marco recovered quickly, drawing a knife from his jacket. The fight was brutal and swift. Furniture splintered as the men grappled. Each blow meant to kill. Isabella watched in horror as Dante gained the upper hand, pinning her brother to the ground, his hands wrapped around Marco's throat. Marco's face turned purple, his eyes bulging. Dante's expression was terrifying, empty of everything except the desire to end her brother's life. "Please," Isabella choked out. "Don't." Something in her voice reached him. Dante's hands loosened, but his eyes remained cold. Marco gasped for air, coughing violently. The violence, the betrayal, the lies, it all became too much. Isabella turned and ran, her feet carrying her through the mansion's corridors and out into the night. The cool air hit her face, but it couldn't wash away the image of Dante's murderous rage or her brother's treachery. Behind her, she heard Dante's heavy footsteps. "You can't leave me, Isabella." The moonlight filtered through the heavy curtains, casting long shadows across Isabella's huddled form. She'd found refuge in the darkest corner of the estate's library, where ancient leather-bound books and heavy wooden shelves created a fortress around her. Her fingers traced absent patterns on the Persian rug beneath her, mind spinning with the weight of everything that had happened. Her brother's face, twisted with rage, flashed through her mind. The sound of fists connecting with flesh, Dante's deadly grace as he moved, ready to end a life, her own brother's life. The memory made her stomach turn. Who was she now? The widow who'd been left for dead? The woman who'd found herself trapped in Dante's world? Or something else entirely? Her hand drifted to her stomach, to the life growing inside her, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. The door opened with a soft click. Isabella didn't need to look up to know it was Dante. She could feel his presence, heavy and magnetic, filling the room. His footsteps were quiet on the thick carpet as he approached, none of his usual predatory swagger present. Isabella. His voice was different, softer, almost uncertain, the kind of voice she'd never thought him capable of using. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, watching his shadow stretch toward her. "Leave me alone, Dante." Instead of leaving, he lowered himself to the floor beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, but not quite touching. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. "I've never had anyone like you," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "Anyone who made me question everything. Anyone who made me." He paused, searching for words. Weak, Isabella's heart stuttered in her chest. She turned to look at him then, really look at him. In the dim light, his face was all sharp angles and shadows, but his eyes, usually so cold and calculating, held something raw and vulnerable. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Everything I thought I knew was a lie. My husband, my brother, my whole life." She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. "I don't know where I end and you begin anymore, Dante. You've consumed everything." He reached for her then, his large hand engulfing hers. The calluses on his palm reminded her of what those hands were capable of, both violence and tenderness. He lifted her hand slowly, deliberately, and pressed it against his chest. His heart beat strong and steady under her palm. "You feel that?" His voice was low, intense. "That's what you do to me. No one else. Just you." Isabella tried to pull away, but his grip tightened not enough to hurt, just enough to keep her there. "Dante, I'm not asking you to be mine anymore, Isabella." His other hand came up to cradle her face, thumb brushing away a stray tear. "I'm telling you." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent a shiver down her spine, a mix of fear and something else, something darker, more primal. "You'll either stay with me," he continued, his breath warm against her skin as he leaned closer, "or you'll die trying to escape." His words were brutal in their honesty, but his touch remained gentle, almost reverent. "There is no in-between. Not anymore." The air between them crackled with tension, heavy with the weight of his declaration. Isabella sat frozen, caught between the darkness of his world and the impossible pull of her heart toward this dangerous man who'd claimed her so completely. The night clung to the estate like a shroud, heavy and oppressive. Isabella stood at the window of her room, watching shadows dance across the manicured lawn. Her fingers traced patterns on the cold glass, her breath creating small clouds of fog. The quiet was deceptive. She knew better now. A sharp knock broke the silence. One of Dante's men burst in, his face tight with urgency. "Boss needs you downstairs. Now." In the study, Dante stood over his desk, surrounded by his most trusted lieutenants. Maps and documents covered every surface. His right-hand man was speaking in low, urgent tones, pointing at various locations. When Isabella entered, Dante's head snapped up, his eyes finding hers immediately. "They're coming," he said simply. The words carried weight, heavy with implications. His right-hand man stepped forward, tablet in hand. "The rival boss has mobilized his forces. Our sources confirm he's gathered allies from 3 different territories." He swiped through surveillance photos, showing convoys of black vehicles moving through the city. "They want her. They think she's the key to destroying you." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. The rival boss. She remembered him from her past life, always lurking at the edges of her late husband's business dealings. A man whose smile never reached his eyes, whose words dripped with hidden venom. Dante's jaw clenched. "Get everyone in position." I want every exit covered, every approach monitored. No one gets within a mile of this compound without us knowing." The room erupted into controlled chaos as men dispersed, phones pressed to their ears, orders being relayed. Isabella watched as Dante's empire mobilized for war. His men moved with practiced precision, years of loyalty and training evident in every action. Hours passed like molasses. Isabella paced the study while Dante coordinated his forces, his voice growing hoarser with each passing hour. The sun had long since set when she finally broke the tense silence between them. What happens if we don't survive this? The question slipped out before she could stop it, hanging in the air between them. Dante looked up from his papers, his dark eyes finding hers across the room. He stood slowly, deliberately, and crossed the space between them. His presence filled her world, dangerous and magnetic. "Then you'll know, once and for all, that I never let anyone take what's mine." His voice was low, rough with exhaustion and something darker. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "You're mine, Isabella, and I protect what's mine." The night deepened around them as final preparations were made. Guards doubled, then tripled. Weapons were distributed, medical supplies stockpiled. Isabella felt the weight of it all pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. In their bedroom, Dante pulled her against him, his arms like steel bands around her waist. His breath was ragged against her skin, his heartbeat strong and steady against her back. "I'll protect you," he whispered into her hair, the words both gentle and fierce. Isabella closed her eyes, letting herself sink into his embrace, into the dangerous comfort he offered. His hold tightened, possessive and protective all at once. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the barely contained violence that always simmered beneath his surface. The promise in his words felt like salvation and damnation combined, a reminder that she was caught in his world now, for better or worse. The morning sun cast long shadows across Dante's estate as the first shots rang out. The peaceful facade of daybreak shattered under the weight of gunfire and screams. From her position near the window, Isabella watched as black SUVs crashed through the front gates, their occupants spilling out like angry wasps from a disturbed nest. Dante's right-hand man barked orders through his radio, directing their forces to defensive positions. The estate transformed into a war zone within minutes. Security teams moved with military precision, taking up strategic points around the perimeter. "Get down!" Dante grabbed Isabella, pulling her away from the window just as bullets sprayed through the glass. She felt his heart hammering against her back as they crouched behind a solid oak desk. "They shouldn't have known about this location," he growled, his eyes scanning the chaos outside. "Someone told them." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. The realization hit her like ice water. They had a traitor in their midst. Her mind raced through the possibilities, remembering the careful glances and whispered conversations she'd witnessed over the past few days. The battle intensified. Explosions rocked the foundation of the house as grenades detonated in the garden. Through the smoke and debris, Isabella could make out Dante's men engaging the attackers. Bodies fell on both sides. "Stay here!" Dante commanded, his voice tight with controlled rage. He pressed a gun into her hands before moving toward the door, but Isabella couldn't stay put. As she maneuvered through the house, she overheard radio chatter that confirmed her worst fears. The enemy knew their exact defensive positions, their escape routes, everything. This wasn't just a leak. This was a complete betrayal from someone who knew all their secrets. She rounded a corner and froze. Through a partially open door, she saw one of Dante's most trusted lieutenants speaking urgently into a phone. "They're moving to the East Wing now." "Yes, he's with her. Make it quick." Dante appeared like a shadow, his movements silent and deadly. The lieutenant barely had time to turn before Dante's fist connected with his jaw. The phone clattered to the floor, still connected to their enemies. "You betrayed us." Dante's voice was eerily calm, but his eyes blazed with fury. "After everything I gave you," the lieutenant spat blood. "You're weak, Moretti. The woman made you weak. The family deserves better." Dante's response was swift and brutal. He moved with a ferocity that made Isabella's blood run cold. Each punch, each kick was delivered with precise, calculated rage. This wasn't just about elimination. This was personal vengeance. The battle outside reached a crescendo. Dante's loyal men, now aware of the betrayal, fought with renewed vigor. The sound of gunfire intensified, punctuated by explosions and the screech of metal on metal. Isabella watched as Dante transformed into something else entirely, a force of nature, unstoppable and merciless. He tore through the enemy ranks like a hurricane, leaving destruction in his wake. Bodies littered the ground wherever he went, a testament to his fury. When the last shot faded into silence, Dante stood in the middle of the carnage. Blood dripped from his knuckles, staining the expensive marble floor. His suit, once immaculate, was torn and spattered with red. His chest heaved with exertion as he turned to face Isabella. Their eyes met across the destruction. In his gaze, she saw pain that went beyond physical wounds, the deep cut of betrayal, the anger of trust destroyed. His jaw clenched as he spoke, his voice raw and determined. "This ends now." Isabella felt the weight of those words settle over her like a heavy cloak. The finality in his tone told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't just another fight. This was the beginning of their last stand. The estate lay in ruins around them, smoke rising from the remnants of what was once Dante's pristine mansion. Blood stained the marble floors, mixing with broken glass and shell casings. Isabella stood in the middle of it all, her white dress now crimson, her hands trembling as she surveyed the destruction. Dante's right-hand man moved through the wreckage, directing the cleanup crews. Bodies were being removed, evidence erased. This was the world she now belonged to, efficient, brutal, unforgiving. Isabella touched her split lip, wincing at the sting. The fight had been savage, desperate. She'd seen Dante transform into something else entirely, a demon wrapped in an expensive suit, dealing death with practiced precision. But she'd changed too. The woman who'd been left for dead on that street weeks ago was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who understood the cost of survival. "You're bleeding." Dante's voice came from behind her, rough with exhaustion. He looked different now, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, a cut above his eye still weeping blood. Yet his eyes remained sharp, alert, scanning constantly for threats even though their enemies lay dead. "So are you," she replied, turning to face him. The air between them crackled with something electric, dangerous. They'd fought side by side, trusted each other when the betrayal came to light. Now, standing in the aftermath, Isabella felt the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. Dante stepped closer, his presence overwhelming even in his wounded state. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing over her split lip with unexpected gentleness. "You surprised me today," he murmured, voice low enough that only she could hear. "I didn't expect you to fight." Isabella leaned into his touch, despite everything inside her screaming to run. "I didn't have a choice. They would have killed us both." "There's always a choice." Dante's eyes darkened. "You chose to stay, to fight, to become this." The words hung between them, heavy with truth. She had chosen this, chosen him, chosen this life, chosen to embrace the darkness instead of running from it. The realization should have terrified her, but instead, it felt like coming home. Around them, Dante's men continued their work, moving with practiced efficiency to erase all evidence of the battle. The betrayal had cut deep, one of Sit One, Dante's most trusted lieutenants, selling them out to their enemies. The price of that betrayal had been paid in blood, but the cost went beyond the physical destruction. Isabella watched as another body was carried out, remembering how it felt to pull the trigger herself. She wasn't innocent anymore. Hadn't been since the moment Dante found her on that street. But now, she understood why he'd become what he was, why the violence was necessary in this world. "Come," Dante said, his hand sliding down to grasp hers. "There's work to be done." He led her through the ruins of what had once been his office, now a testament to the brutality of their victory. Glass crunched under their feet as they moved, but Dante's grip remained steady, grounding her in the present moment. They stopped at the window overlooking the city, the same view she'd tried to escape from just weeks ago. Now it represented something different, not a prison, but a kingdom. Their kingdom, built on blood and bullets and the kind of love that destroyed everything in its path. Dante pulled her against his chest, his heartbeat strong and steady against her back. His arms wrapped around her, protective and possessive all at once. This was what victory felt like, bitter and sweet, terrible and beautiful. "You're mine now," he said, his voice steady but raw with emotion. "Forever." The mansion lay in ruins, smoke still rising from the wreckage of what had once been Dante's empire. Bodies littered the ground, a grim reminder of the battle that had just ended. Isabella stood in the middle of it all, her white dress now stained with ash and blood, her hands trembling as the adrenaline slowly faded from her system. Dante moved through the carnage like a ghost, his expensive suit torn and bloodied. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, held something different now, a weariness that spoke of more than just physical exhaustion. He approached Isabella slowly, as if afraid she might bolt at any sudden movement. "It's over," he said softly, his voice hoarse from shouting orders during the fight. "They're all gone." Isabella nodded, unable to find her voice. The silence between them felt different now, charged with something other than fear or hostility. She watched as Dante's right-hand man approached, whispering something urgent in his ear. But for the first time since she'd known him, Dante waved him away. "Sir," the man persisted, "the other families will be looking for answers. We need to establish control. Let them wait." Dante cut him off, his eyes never leaving Isabella's face. The man retreated, shock evident in his expression. Never had Dante put anything before business. Isabella felt her heart skip a beat as Dante closed the distance between them. His hands, still spotted with blood, reached for hers. She didn't pull away. "I've spent my whole life building this empire," he said, gesturing to the destruction around them. "I've killed for it, bled for it, lost everything that ever mattered to me for it." His grip tightened on her hands. "But looking at you now, none of it matters anymore." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done." The words fell from his lips like a confession. "The territory wars, the blood feuds, the endless cycle of violence, I'm walking away from all of it." She stared at him in disbelief. "You can't just walk away from the Mafia." "Watch me." His jaw set in that familiar stubborn line she'd come to know so well. "I'll hand over control to my lieutenants, divide the territory fairly. There will be peace, or there will be consequences." "The other families won't accept that," Isabella protested, even as her heart raced at the possibility. "They'll see it as weakness." "Let them." Dante's eyes blazed with intensity. "I've spent years being the monster they needed me to be. But for you—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "For you, I'll be something else." Isabella felt tears prick at her eyes. "And what if you can't change? What if this life is too much a part of you?" Dante reached up, his thumb gently wiping away a smudge of ash from her cheek. The tenderness of the gesture made her shiver. I already have changed. From the moment I found you on that street, nothing has been the same. Around them, his men worked to clear the debris, their movements careful and measured. They kept their distance, sensing that something momentous was happening between their boss and the woman who had turned their world upside down. I can't promise it will be easy, Dante continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, but I can promise you this. Whatever life we build together will be ours alone. No more violence, no more death, just us. Isabella looked up at him, seeing past the blood and violence to the man beneath, the man who had protected her, fought for her, changed for her. His eyes held no deception now, only raw honesty, and something that looked remarkably like love. You're my world now, he declared, his voice rough with emotion. I'll burn it all to protect you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ruins of what was once Dante's empire. Broken glass crunched beneath their feet as they walked through the wreckage of the estate. Isabella's hand rested protectively over her growing belly, while Dante's vigilant eyes scanned their surroundings. Old habits, dying hard. The air still smelled of gunpowder and smoke, but there was something different now, a sense of finality, of closing chapters. Dante's right-hand man stood at attention near one of the remaining SUVs, his stoic expression masking the relief that the war was finally over. The perimeter is secure, boss, he reported, his voice carrying across the debris-strewn courtyard. All threats have been neutralized. Dante nodded, his hand finding the small of Isabella's back. The touch was gentle, a stark contrast to the violence they'd just survived. She leaned into him, exhausted but steady. It's really over? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante's jaw tightened as he surveyed the destruction around them. Bodies had been cleared, but blood still stained the marble floors. This place had been his fortress, his kingdom. Now it was just another reminder of the price they'd paid for freedom. The old life is over, he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. Everything I built, everything I fought for, none of it matters anymore. Isabella turned to face him, her eyes searching his. Do you regret it? Instead of answering, Dante pulled her closer, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. The tenderness in his touch spoke volumes. This was a different man from the one who'd found her bleeding on the street. The monster had learned to love, and love had changed everything. His right-hand man approached with papers in hand, documents that would ensure their safe passage, new identities, a fresh start. The loyal soldier's expression remained neutral, but there was understanding in his eyes. He'd seen Dante through countless battles, but this was different. This was surrender of the best kind. Everything's ready, he said, handing over the documents. The safe house is prepared. Isabella watched as Dante took the papers, noting how his hands trembled slightly. This wasn't just leaving a location. It was abandoning an identity, a legacy. The mighty Dante Moretti, terror of the underworld, was choosing love over power. They walked together through the ruined halls, past shattered windows and bullet-riddled walls. Each step took them further from the violence that had defined their beginning. Isabella's brother's betrayal still stung, but even that pain was fading in the face of their shared future. I never thought I'd walk away, Dante admitted, his voice low. This life, it was everything I knew. Isabella squeezed his hand. And now? Now I have something worth more than territory or respect. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. I have you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise. Around them, the remnants of their violent past lay in ruins. But something new was rising from the ashes. Something stronger than vengeance or power. Something worth protecting. As they reached the waiting car, Isabella paused for one last look at the estate. This place had been her prison, then her battlefield, and finally, unexpectedly, the place where she'd found a love stronger than fear. Dante opened the car door, but before Isabella could step in, he pulled her close one more time. His eyes, once cold and calculating, now held a warmth that made her breath catch. "We're just getting started," he said. And in those words lay all their tomorrows. The morning sun painted streaks of gold across the horizon, its warm rays filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dante's estate. Isabella sat curled against him on the balcony, their fingers intertwined, her head resting on his shoulder. The gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers from the garden below a peaceful scene that seemed impossible just weeks ago. Dante's thumb traced lazy circles on her palm, his touch gentle yet possessive. The man who had once terrified her now brought her comfort. His presence, once suffocating, had become her sanctuary. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. "I never thought I'd end up here," Isabella murmured, breaking the quiet. Her free hand rested protectively over her growing belly, where their child grew stronger each day. The same child that had inadvertently brought them together that fateful night. Dante's lips curved into that familiar smirk, the one that still made her heart skip a beat. "I didn't either, but here we are." His voice carried a hint of wonder, as if he too couldn't quite believe how their story had unfolded. The morning light caught the story. Silver bands on their fingers, a symbol of their commitment, their choice to face whatever came next together. Isabella remembered the blood, the violence, the betrayals that had marked their path, but she also remembered the moments of tenderness, the way Dante's hands could be both deadly weapons and gentle caresses. They watched as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. The estate that had once felt like a prison now felt like home. The walls that had kept her in now kept others out, protecting rather than confining. Dante pulled her closer, his chest solid and warm against her back. His empire had shifted, evolved, no longer built purely on violence and fear, but on something stronger: love, loyalty, and the fierce determination to protect what was his, what was theirs. The morning air carried the sounds of life beginning to stir in the compound below. Guards changing shifts, staff beginning their daily routines, all of them now part of this new world they'd built together. A world where power and tenderness could coexist, where love could bloom even in the darkest places. "We made it," Isabella whispered, tilting her head to look up at him. The hardness in his eyes had softened, though that dangerous edge remained a reminder of who he was, who he would always be. But now she understood that this darkness was part of what made him who he was, part of what made him hers. As the day broke fully around them, they stood together at the balcony's edge, Dante's arm wrapped protectively around her waist, his touch both possessive and gentle. They had survived the storm, emerged stronger, forever changed, forever bound, forever theirs. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.